In the summer of 1995, in a small Midwestern town where people still waved at strangers and left their doors unlocked because nothing like that happens here, a 5-year-old boy vanished in the middle of the county fair. Maple Grove, population 6,800, one stoplight, one diner everyone called the D like it was a landmark. And every July, 1 week where the town pretended it was bigger than it was, rides, livestock barns, game booths, the smell of grease and sugar in hot air. Parents loved the fair because it felt familiar, safe, like the kind of place where you could relax for the first time all year. That was the lie the fair sold. Mark and Ellen Donovan bought into it the way everyone did. Mark was 32, a power company lineman with calloused hands and a steady paycheck. Ellen was 29, receptionist at the dental clinic, the woman who remembered your kid's birthday and your next appointment without looking. They had 2 children. Hannah was 9, already practicing sarcasm like a sport. Sam was 5, small, all elbows and bright curiosity, blonde hair with a cowlick that refused to flatten, brown eyes that never stopped scanning for the next thing. He'd been talking about the fair since spring, like it was a holiday. The carousel, the pig barn, the blue cotton candy, the little dragon coaster in the kids section. On Saturday, July 22nd, they arrived just after noon. The parking field shimmered under sun, a sea of trucks and dusty sedans. Inside the gates, the fair hit them all at once. Music bleeding from speakers, metal clanking, laughter, the sharp, sweet smell of funnel cake. Ellen did what careful mothers do without thinking. She clipped a small laminated card to the back of Sam's red t-shirt, home phone number in her neat blue ink, then pressed sunscreen onto his shoulders. "Stay where I can see you," she said. Not scared, just responsible. Sam nodded, already half gone in his mind. For hours, it was perfect. The carousel twice, because Sam couldn't decide between the zebra and the tiger. Lemonade sweating in paper cups, corn dogs on a curb, Hannah rolling her eyes and secretly hugging the stuffed bear Mark won at ring toss. In the livestock barn, Sam wrinkled his nose at the smell and asked 100 questions anyway. Around 3, they reached the midway, where everything got louder and tighter and more crowded. Bells rang, barkers shouted, teenagers shrieked on spinning rides. Colored bulbs blinked even though the sun was still up. The kids' ride sat clustered at one end like a bright little island. Sam spotted the green dragon coaster and locked onto it like it was destiny. "That one," he said, bouncing. "Please, please." Ellen hesitated the way parents always do. Line long, crowd thick. But it was a kiddie ride. The track barely rose higher than her shoulders. The operator was a teenage boy with a clipboard and bored eyes. Safe, her brain insisted. Normal. They joined a line. Mark stood behind Hannah, one hand on her shoulder. Ellen stood behind Sam, her palm resting lightly on the small of his back. She could feel his excitement vibrating through his shirt. Every few seconds he craned his neck to watch the dragon cars rattle past, cheeks flushed, hair damp with sweat. The line moved in small jerks. A family ahead stepped into the loading area. The chain gate unhooked. "Next 4, the operator called. Sam took 2 quick steps forward. Ellen's hand slid from his back as she shifted her purse strap. "Wait," she said automatically, reaching. At that exact moment, a man with a bouquet of helium balloons squeezed between people, muttering apologies. Cartoon faces bobbed overhead. The strings swung wide and tangled briefly with the entrance chain. The operator grabbed for them. People shuffled to make space. For maybe 2 seconds, Ellen's view was nothing but balloons and shoulders. 2 seconds. That's all it took. When the balloons passed and the line settled again, Ellen stepped forward, expecting to see the back of a small red shirt right in front of her. The opening was clear. The dragon cars sat empty, waiting. Sam was gone. "Sam?" she called, light at first, the way you call a child who's wandered 2 feet away. No answer. She scanned the immediate cluster of people. A girl in pigtails, a mother with a stroller, a boy holding cotton candy. No blonde head. No red shirt. Her heart thudded once, hard, like her body understood before her mind did. "Sam!" she called again, louder. Still nothing. Ellen turned to the ride operator. "Did a little boy in a red shirt get on?" The teenager shook his head. "No, ma'am. I only loaded 4. I count." Mark was already moving, pushing through the crowd, shouting Sam's name. Hannah stumbled after him, suddenly silent. Ellen spun in a full circle, searching like the world had to hand him back if she looked fast enough. Nothing. No cry, no scream, no struggle anyone noticed. Just empty air where her son had been standing a moment before. Within minutes, fair workers were on radios. Within 20, deputies were at the gates. Within an hour, the loudspeakers were repeating, "Missing child, 5-year-old boy, blonde hair, red shirt." And Maple Grove County Fair, the place that was supposed to be safe, became the last place anyone could say with certainty they'd seen Sam Donovan alive. Because somewhere in those 2 seconds behind the wall of balloons, someone didn't just take advantage of the chaos. They used it. And the question that would haunt Maple Grove for 13 years was terrifyingly simple. In a crowd of thousands, how does a child disappear without anyone seeing it happen? The first minutes after Sam vanished were pure instinct. Ellen moving before she could think, Mark pushing through bodies like the crowd was something he could physically fight. "Sam!" Ellen shouted, voice climbing sharp enough that heads turned, then turned away again when they didn't see a child immediately in trouble. That was the cruel trick of the fair. Too much noise, too many kids, too many parents calling names for ordinary reasons. Ellen grabbed the dragon ride operator by the edge of his clipboard. "Look at me," she said, forcing his eyes up. "A 5-year-old. Blonde. Red shirt. He was right here. Did you see him go anywhere?" The teenager's face drained. "No, ma'am. I swear I count every kid. He didn't get on." Mark was already circling behind the ride, scanning for gaps, shadows, places small bodies could wedge themselves when they panic. Hannah stood frozen near the line entrance, clutching the stuffed bear so hard its seams bent, her eyes darting to every red shirt that passed, like she could will her brother back by recognition alone. Ellen did the thing every mother does before she lets herself believe the worst. She checked the nearest possible places. Under the ride's platform, behind the painted panels where wiring ran like veins, around the booth selling plastic swords. She looked for a flash of blonde hair, for denim shorts, for that laminated white tag she'd clipped on as a quiet safety measure. She found nothing. Fair security arrived first, teenagers in neon vests suddenly out of their depth. One of them radioed the fair office while another tried to keep Ellen calm, and failed. "Ma'am, we're going to make an announcement," he said, like announcements could reach into the air and pull a child out. Within minutes, a deputy from the county sheriff's office cut through the crowd, followed by 2 more, their radios crackling. The lead deputy didn't waste time with comfort. "When did you last see him?" 2 seconds, Ellen said, and hated how unbelievable it sounded. "He was in front of me. Balloons passed. Then he was gone." "What was he wearing?" "Red shirt, denim shorts, blonde hair. I clipped a laminated card to the back of his shirt, our phone number." The deputy nodded sharply, already gesturing to his team. "Lock the gates, stop the shuttle, get the announcer." The fair announcer's cheerful voice cut off mid-sentence. Static. Then a new tone, flat, official. "Attention, folks. We're looking for a missing child. 5-year-old boy, blonde hair, red t-shirt, denim shorts.
Answers to the name Sam.
If you see him, contact a deputy or fair staff immediately. The words repeated over and over, loud enough to reach the livestock barns and the beer tent and the parking field. Suddenly the fair's mood shifted. Parents tightened their grip on small wrists. Teenagers who'd been laughing too loudly went quiet, scanning faces like they were seeing the crowd for the first time. Vendors leaned out of booths, eyes narrowing, actually looking now. Mark ran toward the nearest exit and saw deputies already there, stopping people. "Where are you going?" one deputy asked a man carrying a tired toddler. "Home," the man snapped. "We're done." "Then you're going to stand right there and tell me your child's name," the deputy said, unblinking. "Say it while I can see the child." "Then you can leave." It wasn't gentle. It wasn't polite. It was what happens when a small town realizes it has minutes, not hours. The sheriff arrived within 20 minutes, sweat darkening his collar, face set hard. He pulled Ellen and Mark into the thin shade near the first aid tent and asked the questions that sound like accusations even when they're not. "Any custody disputes? Anyone angry at you? Anyone ever threaten you?" "No," Mark said, voice raw. "We're nobody. We don't have enemies." "Does he know to go to staff?" the sheriff asked Ellen. "Yes," she said, and then her voice cracked. "He's 5. He's 5. The sheriff glanced toward the service lanes behind the booths. "Get K9, he ordered. "Now." While they waited, search teams formed in messy waves, deputies, fair workers, volunteers. They checked restrooms. They checked the livestock barns and every aisle between stalls. They looked under bleachers with flashlights, even though it was still daylight, because children hide in stupid places when they're scared, and because hope makes you check anyway. Ellen walked the midway like a ghost trapped in her own body, calling Sam's name until it felt like the syllable had lost meaning. Each time she called, she expected, needed to hear a small voice answering, to see a boy running back, embarrassed and crying because he'd wandered too far. There was nothing. No voice. No footsteps. No one saying, "He's here." The K9 unit arrived just before 6, the handler calm in that professional way that feels almost cruel when you're falling apart. He asked for something with Sam's scent. Ellen yanked off Sam's baseball cap from the cooler where she'd tossed it earlier, hands shaking, and pressed it into the handler's palm like it was sacred. The dog sniffed once, tail stiffened, then pulled hard toward the kid's ride area. Ellen's heart surged. This is it. It knows. It will lead us to him. The dog moved with purpose, weaving behind booths, past stacks of folded fencing, toward a narrow chain-link gate most families never noticed because it wasn't meant for them. A vendor gate, propped open with a concrete block. The dog slipped through without hesitation and dragged the handler down a gravel service road behind the fairgrounds, the hidden spine of the place. Dumpsters, generators, the backs of trailers, a world built for staff, not families. Mark followed, fists clenched, eyes wide, because this was the path no child should ever take alone. The dog tracked fast, nose low, until the gravel met the edge of the property and turned to asphalt at County Route 17. Then the dog slowed, circled, sniffed in tight loops, confused. The handler crouched, reading the change. He looked up at the sheriff and didn't soften the truth. "Trail ends here," he said quietly. "Vehicle pickup, likely." Ellen felt her knees weaken, as if the words had weight. Vehicle. That meant Sam wasn't lost somewhere on the fairgrounds. That meant someone had carried him, or led him, out the back, into a car, and into distance. The sheriff's expression hardened like stone. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Close the fair.
Nobody leaves without being checked, and get me every staff roster, every vendor list, every person with access to that gate. Because at the Maple Grove County Fair, behind the lights and the music, there had always been a back way out. And now they knew Sam had gone through it. By morning, Maple Grove had turned into a town with one thought and one sound: Sam's name. It was shouted down dirt roads, called across cornfields, whispered into phone receivers by exhausted deputies taking tips from strangers who wanted to help and didn't know how.
The fairgrounds sat closed and strangely silent. Rides locked in place under a pale sky like toys abandoned mid-game. The sheriff's office set up a command table with maps spread flat, highlighters and pushpins marking where dogs tracked, where volunteers searched, where cars might have turned off County Route 17 without being seen. At the center of everything was a simple fact that felt impossible. A 5-year-old had gone missing in a crowd, in daylight, and the ground hadn't opened to swallow him. A person had moved him. A person had chosen the back gate. That meant intent. That meant planning. That meant someone who knew the fair's bones, where families weren't watching, where cameras didn't exist, where staff moved freely. The sheriff ordered every fair worker and vendor back for interviews before the ride company could pack and leave. "Nobody rolls out until I say so," he told the fair organizer, whose hands shook as he nodded. Under a pop-up canopy near the entrance, deputies lined up people with sunburned faces and tired eyes. Ride operators, game booth workers, food vendors, security volunteers. They asked the same questions again and again. Where were you at 3:15? Who had keys to the vendor gate? Did you see a child crying? Did you see a man carrying a child? Did you see a kid walking with someone he trusted? Most answers were useless. "I was selling corn dogs. I was checking seat belts. I was on break smoking behind the trailers." When panic hits, everyone suddenly remembers less than they should. But a few details began to repeat. Small enough to dismiss if you wanted to. Too consistent to ignore if you couldn't. One vendor said he saw a man in a ball cap near the service road around the time the announcement went out. Another said he noticed a sedan idling on County Route 17, where people usually didn't stop. Neither could give a plate. Neither had a clear face. Still, the sheriff wrote it down. Ball cap, sedan, service road. Every new scrap felt like something you could build a bridge from if you had enough of them. Search lines formed by noon. Volunteers from church groups and nearby towns arrived with bottled water and strong backs. They combed ditches and tree lines, fields and drainage culverts, calling Sam's name until their throats burned. The county brought in horseback teams to cover rough ground. A helicopter from the state police circled low, its shadow sliding over corn like a moving stain. In the first 2 days, the energy was desperate and almost hopeful. People still believed that if they searched hard enough, the boy would be found tucked somewhere, crying but alive, like the world would eventually correct itself. But as hours became days, the hope shifted shape. It wasn't a question of where Sam could be hiding anymore. It was a question of where someone could take him fast. And that was a much bigger map. The sheriff's office fielded tips by the dozen. A woman thought she'd seen Sam at a gas station off Route 9, a blond boy in a red shirt holding hands with a man who wouldn't let go. Deputies raced out, pulled security footage, froze frames. The child wasn't Sam. Another caller swore she heard a child screaming in the back of a van at a rest stop. Troopers stopped vans for the next 2 days, checking cargo spaces and back seats, apologizing to angry drivers who didn't understand why their lives were being interrupted. Nothing. A tip came in from a teen who said she saw a small boy behind the livestock barns late that night. She wasn't sure. She'd been tired. Still, deputies searched that area again with dogs because
Not sure is better than nothing when you're chasing a vanishing point. As the search widened, the investigation turned inward, because it always does. Detectives sat Mark and Ellen down in separate rooms and asked questions that felt like insults.
Were they fighting? Any custody disputes? Financial trouble? Anyone in the family with addictions? Ellen stared at the detective like he'd spoken a foreign language. "My son is missing," she said, voice flat with exhaustion. "And you're asking me if I'm lying?" "We have to ask," the detective replied, not meeting her eyes. Mark took a polygraph and watched the needle jump each time Sam's name was spoken, because grief makes your body react whether you're guilty or not. The results came back inconclusive. The worst word in that context because it gives people permission to doubt you. Rumors spread through Maple Grove like spilled oil. Some people whispered that Mark must have done something. Others whispered that Ellen staged it for attention. Most people hated themselves for thinking it at all. But fear makes communities turn on anyone they can point at. Meanwhile, the ride company prepared to leave. Their trucks and trailers sat staged at the edge of the fairgrounds like a convoy ready to vanish overnight. That's when the sheriff pulled out an old file from another state, an assault conviction linked to one of the traveling workers. Rick Jensen, 38, ride foreman, keys issued, authorized access, a man who knew exactly which gates were meant for staff only. Deputies brought him in again. Jensen sat with his arms crossed, chewing gum like he was bored. "I already told you," he said. "I was in the maintenance shed fixing the generator." Two crew members backed him up, one grinning like this was all a waste of time. Jensen's truck was searched again. His trailer was searched. His bags. Nothing. No child's clothing, no toys, no evidence you could hold up in court. The sheriff hated that. He hated that a man could feel wrong and still walk free because feeling isn't proof. "You're holding up my crew," Jensen snapped as the sun went down. "We got another fair in 3 weeks. We can't sit here forever because your kid wandered off." Mark lunged forward at that, and deputies held him back. Ellen stood perfectly still, eyes fixed on Jensen's face like she was trying to burn it into memory. The sheriff released Jensen because he had to, and the next morning, the convoy rolled out of Maple Grove under silent stares. Trucks groaned, trailers rattled, the Ferris wheel's metal skeleton strapped down like a captured beast. Jensen drove out with them, disappearing over the rise on County Route 17, the same road where Sam's scent had ended. Maple Grove watched the lights leave. The town wanted to believe the answer had just driven away. But as weeks passed and the tips slowed, Maple Grove learned the second lesson of a disappearance. Sometimes the person who did it doesn't run because he's scared. Sometimes he leaves because it's exactly what he planned to do all along. And somewhere beyond that county highway, a 5-year-old boy was either still alive in someone's control or already becoming a memory no one could touch. 13 years is long enough for a town to learn how to speak around a name without ever really saying it. Maple Grove still held its county fair every July. The Ferris wheel still rose over the trees. The smell of fried dough still drifted across the parking field. But parents moved differently now. They kept hands on shoulders. They counted heads without thinking. They glanced at every staff gate like it was a mouth that could swallow. In the sheriff's office, Sam Donovan's case file stayed officially open, but it lived in the quiet category that cops don't say out loud. Cold, unless something forces it warm again. Ellen Donovan moved out of the old house 2 years after Sam disappeared because she couldn't stand the way the hallway still expected a small boy to come running down it. Mark stayed in town because leaving felt like surrender. Hannah grew up with a gap where childhood should have been. Every time someone asked, "Do you have siblings?"
She had to decide whether to tell the story or lie to protect herself. The posters faded. The news vans stopped coming. People still prayed, but prayer became something private, folded into everyday life like a scar under clothing. Then, in late August 2008, in a different kitchen, in a different state, a woman named Jill Matthews opened a shoebox. Jill was 40 now, married, 2 kids, a life full of schedules and grocery lists and the kind of normal worries that feel luxurious when you've never lost a child.
She had decided to organize old photos, the kind taken on disposable cameras in the 90s, developed at drugstores, stamped with dates in tiny orange numbers. Most of the pictures were harmless nostalgia, a wedding reception, a beach trip, birthdays where candles glowed in dim living rooms. Near the bottom of the box, she found a stack from a road trip she and her husband took in the summer of 1995, back when they had no children and time felt endless. They'd driven across the Midwest with no strict plan, stopping at diners, roadside attractions, and, one afternoon, a county fair they saw from the highway. Jill didn't remember the town name at first. In her memory, it was just lights rising from cornfields, a Ferris wheel like a glowing coin in the distance. She flipped through the photos. Her husband grinning beside cattle pens, the 2 of them eating funnel cake with powdered sugar on their shirts, a blurry carousel shot. Then she paused on one picture that wasn't a portrait, just a slice of the Midway. Crowds moving between booths, signs flashing, faces caught mid-laugh, mid-step. The focus was soft. The flash blew out a few foreground figures. It was the kind of photo you'd normally toss because it wasn't good. Jill almost did. But something in the lower right corner pulled her back. A small boy, half hidden by a woman's arm and the edge of a booth. Blonde hair sticking up in the back, red t-shirt, denim shorts. His face turned toward the camera at the exact moment the shutter clicked, mouth open like he was calling out. And his eyes. His eyes didn't look like a child having fun. They looked too wide, too sharp, like he'd realized something and didn't know what to do with it. An adult hand clamped around his upper arm, fingers pressing hard enough to crease the fabric, pulling him forward. The hand belonged to a man in a ball cap and sunglasses. Jill couldn't see his full face, but she could see a dark mustache and the forward lean of his body, the posture of someone moving fast. Jill felt a small, cold ripple of unease and tried to talk herself out of it immediately. Parents yank kids in crowds, kids protest, cameras freeze ugly seconds that don't mean anything. But the boy's expression wouldn't let her dismiss it. It wasn't annoyance. It wasn't a tantrum. It looked like fear. That week, in a doctor's office waiting room, Jill picked up an old magazine and flipped through it mindlessly until a feature stopped her thumb mid-page. Long-term missing children, cases that refuse to end. Halfway down, there was a school portrait that made her breath catch. A 5-year-old boy, blonde hair with a stubborn cowlick, brown eyes, ears that stuck out slightly. Red shirt. The caption read, Sam Donovan, missing since 1995. Last seen at Maple Grove County Fair. Jill stared until the room around her blurred. She tore the page out and folded it into her purse like contraband. At home, she laid the magazine photo beside her fair photo. The angles were different, the lighting different. But the match was the kind your brain recognizes before it explains. Same cowlick, Same ear shape. Same mouth. In the school portrait, he looked calm, posed. In Jill's photo, he looked older by weeks or months, and terrified. Her husband leaned over her shoulder, squinted, and didn't laugh the way he would have if this was nothing. "Where did we take that?" he asked slowly. Jill searched her memory. The smell, the noise, the way they'd pulled off the highway on impulse. Her husband snapped his fingers.
Cedar Ridge, he said. Off Route 41. Remember the billboard with the giant ear of corn? We said we'd stay an hour and ended up staying until dark. Cedar Ridge. 3 states away from Maple Grove. Jill's pulse climbed as she realized what that meant. If the boy in the photo was Sam, then he didn't vanish into thin air in Maple Grove. He was moved. He was taken on the road,
And someone had him long enough to bring him to another fair, another crowd, another place where he could disappear again in plain sight. Jill stared at the adult hand gripping the boy's arm. Then she stared at the boy's eyes. She thought about the possibility that she'd captured a moment that mattered and then locked it in a shoebox for 13 years because nobody had told her to look. At the bottom of the magazine page was a number for tips. Jill held the phone for a long time, weighing 2 fears. The fear of being wrong and bothering a grieving family, and the fear of being right and staying silent. Finally, she dialed. When the dispatcher in Maple Grove answered, Jill's voice shook as she said,
"You don't know me, and this might sound crazy, but I think I have a photograph of your missing boy."
And in Maple Grove, 13 years after balloons bobbed and a mother's hand missed a red shirt by an inch, a cold file on a shelf finally cracked open again. The sheriff's office had heard every version of hope you can imagine. For 13 years, people called with tips that sounded certain until you asked for details. "I saw him at Walmart. He was at a park with a man. I know that face." Most were honest mistakes. Some were cruel. All of them reopened Ellen Donovan like a wound that never learned to close.
So when the dispatcher handed Detective Carla Hayes a note that said, "Woman out of state claims she has a photo," Hayes treated it like she treated everything in an old case. Skeptical, careful, but unwilling to ignore anything that could be real. Hayes called Jill Matthews back and asked for specifics. Jill's memory wasn't perfect, but it had odd, anchored details that didn't sound like someone spinning a story. A summer road trip, a fair off Route 41, a town name her husband remembered because of a ridiculous billboard, an ear of corn bigger than a car. And most importantly, a printed photo, not a blurry email attachment, from July 1995. "Mail the original," Hayes told her. "Overnight if you can. Don't scan it. I want the print." 2 days later, the envelope arrived. Hayes opened it under bright office lights and felt her stomach tighten in a way she'd learned to trust. The photo wasn't dramatic at first glance, just a crowded midway. But the lower right corner held everything. Blonde boy, red t-shirt, denim shorts, face turned toward the camera, mouth open. And on the back of his collar, a flash of laminated white plastic, exactly the kind of tag Ellen described clipping onto Sam before they even reached the gate. Hayes pulled the Donovan file and found the line in black ink. Mother clipped laminated ID card with home number to child's shirt. She held the photo closer and felt the case shift from theory to substance. The boy's eyes in the photo looked wrong. Not curious, not excited. Wide and urgent, like he wanted someone to notice. An adult hand gripped his upper arm hard enough to wrinkle fabric, guiding him forward. The man attached to that hand wore a ball cap and sunglasses, face turned away as if by accident or habit. Hayes made copies immediately, then called Cedar Ridge PD. She expected indifference. What she got was a pause, then a careful tone. "Cedar Ridge County Fair, summer 95? The detective asked. "Yeah," Hayes said. "Why?" The detective exhaled slowly. "We had a report," he said. "Not a missing child report. A concession worker said she saw a man dragging a crying blonde boy away from the midway. She confronted him. He told her it was his son and she should mind her business. She didn't call until later, after she saw a news segment about a missing boy from a fair in another state. We took a statement, but the fair moved on. No photo, no plate, no name. Hayes' hand tightened around the phone.
Can you find her? She asked. I need her to see something.
2 days later, the Cedar Ridge detective called back. The worker, older now, voice thicker with regret, studied the copy of Jill's photo and went quiet. That's him, she said finally. That's the boy. And that's the man. I remember the way the kid looked at me, like he was trying to speak without making sound. She couldn't swear in court, not with certainty after 13 years, but her reaction wasn't casual. It was pain. It was the memory of a moment she'd spent years replaying, wondering what would have happened if she'd made a scene. Hayes didn't stop there. She pulled fair route records.
The traveling ride company that set up Maple Grove's fair in July had a schedule. Contracts, invoices, internal crew rosters. Maple Grove, then Cedar Ridge 3 weeks later, then a string of other towns. In 1995, Maple Grove deputies had treated Sam's disappearance like it belonged to their county line, like whoever took him would stay local. But a fair route is literally a roadmap for how a person could move a child across states under the cover of normal operations. Hayes traced names in the rosters. Most were temporary seasonal workers, hard to track now. But one name stayed consistent across stops. Rick Jensen, ride foreman. Keys issued. Authorized access to vendor gates. In the old Maple Grove file, Jensen was a footnote. Questioned, alibied, released. An old assault conviction in another state. Suspicion without proof. Now, with Cedar Ridge added to the map, Jensen stopped being a footnote. He became a pattern. Hayes drove to Ellen Donovan's house herself with the original photograph in a folder because this was not something you delivered by phone. Ellen answered the door with the guarded expression of someone who had survived too many false alarms. Her hair was streaked with gray now. Her eyes looked older than her face. Hayes sat at Ellen's kitchen table and slid the photo across without a speech. Ellen picked it up with trembling fingers and stared. The room held its breath. Her finger moved to the boy's collar. "That tag," she whispered, "that's mine." She traced the edge of the laminated flash like touching it could bring her son closer. She looked up, eyes sharp with a kind of anger grief distills over years. "Where was this taken?" "Cedar Ridge," Hayes said quietly. 3 weeks after Sam disappeared from Maple Grove. Ellen's breath hitched. "So he was alive," she said. Not as comfort, as a verdict. He was alive and somebody had him. Hayes nodded. "We're reopening everything," she said. "And we have a name connected to the ride company across those fairs. Rick Jensen." Ellen stared at the adult hand gripping her child's arm in the photo. "Find him," she said, voice low and steady. "Because if that's my boy, I don't care if it's been 13 years. I want him back." Hayes left the house with the original photo locked in an evidence envelope and a new weight on her shoulders. The certainty that somewhere on those fair routes, hidden behind normal paperwork and normal crowds, there had been a child living a stolen life. And the only reason anyone knew was because a stranger finally opened a shoebox and refused to look away. Once Rick Jensen's name clicked into place, the case stopped feeling like a tragedy and started feeling like a hunt. Hayes didn't have the luxury of moving slowly. 13 years had already erased witnesses, blurred memories, and turned evidence into dust. If Jensen was the man in Jill's photograph,
He wasn't going to sit politely at a known address waiting for law enforcement to catch up.
People like Jensen survive by staying one step ahead of paperwork. So Hayes went where paper can't hide. The boring records no one thinks to destroy because they don't look incriminating until you line them up. She subpoenaed the ride company's internal files from 1995. Gate key logs, crew assignments, maintenance sheets, fuel receipts, pay stubs. Jensen's name appeared like a stamp. Foreman, access authorized, keys issued, vendor entrances. The same vendor gate the dog had tracked through in Maple Grove. The same type of service road that fed into the highway at Cedar Ridge. It wasn't proof of abduction by itself, but it was proof of opportunity. And in predator cases, opportunity is often the closest thing to a fingerprint you'll get after years. Next, she traced Jensen forward. DMV hits, Old employment records, utility hookups, court filings. His life looked like a map drawn by someone who didn't want to be held in place. Short leases, cash jobs, seasonal work with traveling outfits, addresses that lasted months and then went blank. But the trail wasn't gone. It just required patience and pressure. Hayes tracked him to a smaller traveling carnival company he worked for in the early 2000s and called the manager. The man's voice was tired, the kind of tired that comes from years of tightening bolts under heat and listening to generators whine. "Rick Jensen," he repeated. "Yeah, I remember him." "Where did he live?" Hayes asked. There was a pause. "Trailer park along the state line," the man said finally. "He had a woman with him. Claire, I think. Quiet." And there was a kid. Hayes felt her pulse jump. "A kid?"
"Blonde," the manager said slowly. "Didn't talk much. Rick said it was his." Hayes wrote down every word like it could bleed. A blonde kid. Quiet. With a man who had access to back gates and service roads. She didn't call it proof. She called it direction. Hayes drove to the trailer park with 2 officers and a warrant request already in motion. The park sat off a highway behind a row of scrubby trees, the kind of place people pass without seeing. A faded sign at the entrance leaned slightly, paint peeling. Gravel crunched under tires. Several trailers had boarded windows. Others had children's bikes rusting by steps like abandoned toys. Hayes found Jensen's unit on the back row. White siding stained gray.
Curtains drawn tight, even in midday. A cracked plastic chair on the steps. The mailbox still had his name in faded marker. Under it, Claire Bishop. A neighbor watering tired flowers watched Hayes too closely, the way people watch trouble. "Rick still live here?" Hayes asked. The neighbor hesitated, then nodded. "He did," she said. "But his car hasn't moved in a few days." "And the kid?" Hayes asked carefully. The neighbor's eyes flicked away. "Haven't seen him in a while," she said. "Teenager now, I guess." "When's the last time you saw him?" "Months," the neighbor whispered, and the whisper felt like guilt. Hayes knocked. No answer. She knocked again. Still nothing. She listened at the door and heard only dead air. The park manager confirmed the rent was overdue. "He comes and goes," the manager said, nervous. "Always paid, until recently."
Hayes got the warrant. They entered. The air inside was stale, old smoke, grease, damp fabric. The first thing Hayes saw was not blood, not weapons. It was evidence of a life that didn't belong in that space. A faded dinosaur poster taped crookedly on a wall, scuffed sneakers by the couch, too small for an adult, and along the paneling near a narrow bed, children's drawings taped in an uneven line. A Ferris wheel, a dragon coaster, stick figures holding hands. Under one, in shaky handwriting, the word home. Hayes' throat tightened. Because this wasn't just a criminal hiding a secret. This looked like a child trying to make sense of where he was. They searched methodically. Drawers, cabinets, under cushions.
Behind false panels. In the back of a dresser, wrapped inside an old shirt like a keepsake, Hayes found a laminated card. The edges were curled with age. A phone number was written on it in neat blue ink. Hayes didn't need Ellen beside her to recognize the handwriting. They'd already pulled Ellen's old forms from the Donovan file. It matched. Hayes stared at the number until it blurred. This was Maple Grove inside Jensen's dresser. This was not rumor. This was not coincidence. Under the bed, they found a shoebox filled with photographs. Fairs at night, rides glowing, crowds smiling. And mixed among them, pictures of a blonde boy at different ages, 5, 6, 8, 10, standing too stiffly, smiling like he was told to, eyes guarded. In one image, the boy stood in front of a Ferris wheel Hayes recognized from Maple Grove's archived fair photos. The same tree line in the background. He wore a red shirt, not because it was fashionable, because it was part of a story Jensen wanted to keep alive. Hayes sealed everything in evidence bags and put out an alert. 2 days later, a highway patrol officer 2 states away ran plates on an older sedan at a gas station and got a hit tied to an active warrant. Jensen was taken in without a fight. He didn't thrash. He didn't shout. He sat in the back of the patrol car with his jaw clenched and his eyes forward, like a man who had always known this day could come. In the interview room, Jensen looked older than his 1995 photo. Thinning hair, mustache threaded with gray. But the posture was the same hard line. Hayes laid the evidence out one piece at a time. Jill's photo, the Cedar Ridge copy, the shoebox photos, the laminated tag with Ellen's number. Jensen stared at the table like he could refuse reality by not looking up. "You got pictures," he muttered. "Everybody takes pictures at fairs." Hayes didn't raise her voice. "We found Ellen Donovan's number in your dresser," she said evenly. "We found a decade of photos of a blonde boy. We found drawings of a Ferris wheel and a dragon ride taped to your wall. And we have a witness who remembers confronting a man dragging a crying boy away at Cedar Ridge." So I'm going to ask you one time, Rick. Where is Claire Bishop? And where is that boy?
Jensen's eyes flicked up, and for the first time something broke through the mask. Fear, yes, but also resentment. Like he was offended the world was interrupting the life he built. "He's not a boy," Jensen said flatly. "He's almost grown." Hayes held his gaze. "Then tell me where he is." Jensen's mouth twitched. He looked away again. Silence stretched until even the hum of the fluorescent lights felt loud. Then Jensen spoke, not a confession, not yet, but a sentence that changed everything. "You think you're saving him," he said quietly. "You don't understand what we saved him from." Hayes didn't blink, because that line wasn't denial. It was ownership. And if Jensen believed he'd saved Sam Donovan, then somewhere, alive or not, there had been a life under Jensen's control long after Maple Grove stopped hearing Sam's name called over loudspeakers. The truth didn't come as a clean confession. It came in pieces, the way it always does when someone has spent years practicing a lie until it feels like a religion. Jensen sat across from Hayes with his jaw tight, eyes refusing the evidence on the table as if looking at it would make it real. He tried denial first, then contempt. Then, when Hayes didn't flinch, he reached for the one story predators love most, the story where they aren't the villain. He wasn't safe, Jensen muttered. That fair was chaos. Parents don't watch.
Kids get hurt. Hayes let him talk just enough to hang himself with his own words.
You didn't call police, she said calmly. You didn't bring him to staff. You didn't walk him to the gate. You took him through a vendor entrance and your truck was gone before the announcement started. That's not rescue, Rick. That's abduction. Jensen's mouth twitched with irritation, not shame. You don't get it, he whispered again, like the phrase could protect him. Hayes slid Jill's photograph closer. Start with Cedar Ridge, she said. Explain why he's in your hand 3 weeks later. The mention of Cedar Ridge cracked something. Jensen's eyes flicked to the photo, then away. People saw, he said, voice low.
I had to move faster after that. It wasn't a full admission, but it was the first time he spoke like the boy in the picture was real, like the moment had happened the way it looked. Hayes pressed. Where is Claire Bishop? Jensen exhaled hard through his nose. She left, he said. Took off when things got hard. Where? Hayes asked. He didn't answer. Hayes already had a plan for that. Within hours, officers were contacting shelters, clinics, any place a woman without resources might land. They found Claire 2 counties away under a different last name, working nights at a diner, living in a single rented room above a laundromat. When she saw the badge at her door, she nearly collapsed. I didn't know at first, she said before Hayes even asked, words spilling like she'd been holding them in her mouth for years. He told me the boy was his. He told me the boy's mother was dead. He told me everyone would hurt him if we didn't keep moving. Claire's hands shook as she spoke. She wasn't a mastermind. She was a survivor who'd mistaken control for protection until the truth became impossible to ignore. He cried, she said, eyes fixed on the tabletop like looking up would break her. At night. For years. He cried for his mother. Rick would say, stop using that name. He would say, she's gone. He would say, nobody is looking for you. That last sentence landed like a blade. Nobody is looking for you. In Maple Grove, Ellen Donovan had spent 13 years proving that was a lie. But in a trailer park, far from records and school rosters and neighbors who knew your history, Jensen could make a child believe anything if he said it enough times. Claire described the life in those years the way you describe captivity without using the word. No stable school, no doctor visits unless absolutely necessary, no friendships that lasted. The boy learned to stay quiet because quiet children don't attract attention. He learned to answer to Danny because that was the name Jensen chose, a common name that didn't raise questions. He learned the rhythm of fairs and parking lot carnivals, set up at dawn, tear down at midnight, roll out before anyone can connect faces to places. Jensen didn't just take a child. He built a moving cage. The boy grew taller, thinner, older. And as he hit his teens, the thing Jensen feared most began to happen. He began to see the world without Jensen's filter. He saw missing child posters at gas stations. He saw age-progressed faces on TV and diners. He saw, once, a reunion in a grocery store parking lot, someone's mother sobbing over someone's shoulders, and he stared like he was watching a miracle he wasn't allowed to have. Claire said that was the day his eyes changed. He started asking questions, she said. He asked, "What's my real name?" He asked, "Where was I born?" Rick got angry. Not yelling angry. Scary, quiet, angry. Claire swallowed. That night Rick hit him.
Not because of the questions.
because the questions meant Rick was losing him. A month later, the boy left. No grand escape plan, no cash stash, just a backpack and a choice. He walked out before dawn while Jensen slept and didn't look back, because looking back is how you get pulled back in. He drifted through bus stations, shelters, cheap motels, taking whatever work he could. He gave different names to different people because he didn't know which one belonged to him. He trusted no one fully. When you grow up being told the world will swallow you, you learn to keep your story close. The break came in a youth drop-in center 2 states away. A volunteer noticed the way he flinched at sudden movement, the way he scanned doors, the way he avoided giving details like details could be used against him. She asked a simple question.
Do you know your social security number? He didn't. Do you have a birth certificate? He didn't. The volunteer opened a missing youth database, not because she was chasing drama, but because she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. When she pulled up an age-progressed image of Sam Donovan, older face, longer jaw, familiar eyes, the boy froze. He leaned closer to the screen like he was afraid it might disappear. I think, he whispered, voice thin. I think that's me. Law enforcement moved fast after that. Fingerprints, dental comparisons, old medical records from Maple Grove.
Confirmation came in layers, but the anchor, the thing that made everyone in the room go silent, was a small scar on his left knee from when Sam was 3 and fell off a porch step. A scar Ellen had kissed and bandaged so many times she could have found it in the dark. When Ellen walked into the sheriff's office and saw the teenager sitting stiffly in a chair, her body reacted before her mind could catch up. She stopped. Her hand went to her mouth. The boy looked up. Brown eyes. The same cowlick, now tamed but still stubborn. He swallowed hard, like he'd been practicing words for years and still didn't trust them. Ellen said his name softly, not as a test, but as a gift. Sam. He flinched, then exhaled. Mom, he said, and the room seemed to tilt because the word carried 13 years inside it. Reunion didn't erase anything. There were therapists and court dates. There were nights Sam woke shaking because his body still expected footsteps outside a door. There were days Ellen looked at his height, his new shoulders, and grieved the childhood stolen in between. But there was also truth, finally unburied. Jensen was charged, and this time the evidence was more than suspicion. Jill's photograph, the Cedar Ridge statement, the laminated tag with Ellen's handwriting, the shoebox of photos, Claire's testimony, and Sam himself, alive, older, scarred, but real. Maple Grove learned the lesson the hardest way possible. Danger doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears a ball cap and carries keys to a back gate. Sometimes it moves quietly through a crowd while everyone else is looking at the lights. And sometimes, 13 years later, the only reason the truth comes back is because a stranger opened a shoebox and refused to pretend the corner of a photo didn't matter.